You text a friend you haven't spoken to in months. You drop one line into a group chat. You nod at a neighbor whose name you're not quite sure of. Tiny things, forgettable things. For 99% of human history, those throwaway little connections were the line between surviving and vanishing forever. 40,000 years ago, another kind of human quietly stopped making them. They were not stupid. They were not weak. Their brains were bigger than yours. And they died anyway. The reason is so quiet and so familiar that it should genuinely scare you. For 150 years, we told ourselves a comforting story. The Neanderthals lost because they were inferior, slow, brutish, outthought by smarter humans with better spears. Almost none of that is true. In April 2026, researchers at the University of Montreal and Cambridge ran the actual numbers, and the comforting story fell apart. They didn't freeze to death. They didn't starve in one dramatic apocalypse. They died of something we are only now starting to take seriously. They died alone. Think about how heavy that word actually is, alone. We use it for a bad Friday night. For them, it was the entire story. And here's the part that should humble you. We very nearly joined them. At one point, our own ancestors were down to a population you could fit inside a single football stadium. The difference between us and extinction was never our bodies. It was who we knew. Picture this. It is Europe, 60,000 years ago. The Neanderthals own this continent. They have owned it for 200,000 years. These are not the knuckle-dragging cavemen from the cartoons. They make tools, they make art, they bury their dead, and they care for their sick. They survive ice ages that would erase you and everyone you love in a single weekend. A band moves across the cold, 20, maybe 50 people, working a patch of land about 2,500 square kilometers wide. They know every ridge, every river, every animal den inside it. They are, by any honest measure, the toughest humans who have ever lived. And that toughness is exactly what kills them. Because a few valleys over, another kind of human is doing something strange. Homo sapiens are building friends. Not just family, not just the band, strangers. They trade with groups they aren't related to. They marry across borders. They carry seashells hundreds of miles inland from a coast they may never see again. They are weaving an invisible net, a web of people they can run to when their own corner of the world falls apart. The Neanderthals never weave that net. They stay home, they stay small, they stay with their own. And for 200,000 years, staying small works perfectly. Until the weather stops making sense. Here's what nobody talks about. It wasn't the cold that killed them. They had beaten the cold 100 times before. It was the chaos. Around 45,000 years ago, the climate stops being merely brutal and starts being unpredictable. Warm, then freezing, then warm again, swinging faster than any group can adapt. A valley that fed your family for 10 generations empties out in one. The herds move, the plants die, the map you spent your whole life memorizing is suddenly worthless. And now that one difference between the two humans becomes a death sentence. When a Homo sapiens band's land collapses, they pack up and walk to allies they've known for years. A door opens, a fire is shared. When a Neanderthal band's land collapses, there is no allied band, no door, no net. There is only the cold, and each other. And we have actually found one of them. Deep in a cave in the Rhone Valley of France, in a place called Grotte Mandrin, lie the bones of a Neanderthal man. The scientists named him Thorin, after the last dwarf king under the mountain. When they read his DNA, they assumed their machines were broken. Because Thorin's family line had split off from every other Neanderthal around 105,000 years ago, and then never mixed with another group again. For 50,000 years. 50,000 years of total isolation. Here is the part that breaks your brain. Other Neanderthals were living about a 10-day walk away, close enough to find, close enough to know. And for 500 straight centuries, Thorin's people simply ignored them. The lead researcher, Ludovic Slimak, put it plainly. This would be, in his words, unimaginable for a sapiens. We cannot stop ourselves from reaching out. They could not bring themselves to start. Generation after generation, the same shrinking family, the same few faces around the same small fire. And Thorin's own jaw carried the proof. Extra molars buried deep in the bone, a quirk so rare it shows up in about 0.02% of people, the signature of a gene pool with nowhere left to go. He was the last king of a kingdom that had been alone since before history began. But maybe Thorin was just one strange inbred family, maybe everyone else was fine. So, in June 2026, a team at the Max Planck Institute sequenced 27 Neanderthals from the Meuse Basin on the border of Belgium and France. And these ones were thriving. No inbreeding, no genetic rot, diverse, healthy, mobile, finding partners across a wide region, doing everything right. These are the healthiest Neanderthals we have ever found. They are living in a green, rich land around 45,000 years ago. 2,000 years later, every single one of them is gone. Not sick, not weak, not doomed by their blood. Just erased, in an evolutionary blink. And there is one detail in their DNA that should give you chills. Modern humans walking around today still carry Neanderthal genes. We mixed with them. We let them in. But these late Neanderthals carried zero human DNA. None. The connection only ever ran one way. And when the net is gone, and the cold is closing in, isolation does something terrible to a mind. In another Belgian cave, at Goyet, archaeologists found 99 Neanderthal bones from this exact moment of collapse. They had been butchered, cut, cracked open for the marrow, processed with the same cold efficiency as the reindeer lying in the dirt beside them. A thigh bone and 3 shin bones had even been turned into tools, used to sharpen flint. But here is the detail that haunts the people who study it. The victims were women and children, and they were not local. They were outsiders. As the world fell apart, the last Neanderthals did not open their doors to strangers. They hunted them. The one instinct that might have saved their entire species, taking outsiders in, had curdled into its exact opposite. When you have never once learned to see a stranger as a friend, then at the very end, you can only see them as meat. So, this is how a species that ruled Europe for 200,000 years actually ends. Not with a battle, not with a meteor. With 1,000 small valleys going quiet, one after another. The East goes first because those bands were the most cut off, then the rest. Iberia, the most connected corner of their world, holds on the longest, because connection always buys time. There is no final Neanderthal standing dramatically on a cliff. There is only a last fire, in a last cave, with the last handful of faces anyone in that bloodline will ever see. And no one is coming for them, because no one was ever invited in. Now here is why this 40,000-year-old story refuses to stay in the past. Look again at what the same researchers found saved our ancestors. It was not strength, it was weak ties, the acquaintance, the distant cousin, the friend of a friend, the neighbor whose name you can never quite remember. The exact connections that, right now, are quietly disappearing from modern life. We talk to more people than any humans in history, and we meet fewer of them than ever. Surveys across Europe now find people have more contact through a screen than they do face-to-face. Slowly, without noticing, we are starting to do the very thing that killed them. Building smaller circles, trusting fewer strangers, pulling the net in. Every group chat that slowly goes silent, every neighbor who stays a stranger, every invitation we keep meaning to send and never do. None of it ever feels like a catastrophe. It never does. And that is the quiet horror of how they actually went. Not in one terrible night, but in a slow, comfortable shrinking, until one day the circle was simply too small to survive. The Neanderthals didn't vanish because the world got too cold. They vanished because, when the world got hard, they had no one to run to. Their brains were bigger than ours. It wasn't enough. The only thing that has ever truly protected a human being is another human being. That was true 40,000 years ago, in a freezing cave in the dark. It is just as true tonight. If this made you think of someone you've lost touch with, that pull you're feeling is 50,000 years old. Don't ignore it. And if you want to see what happened to the other humans, the ones who did build the net and survived, watch this next.